Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a story that's, well, both deeply human and profoundly tragic.
Yeah.
It's about the downfall of a family, really, centered on a ruler, Tsar Nicholas II, who seemed almost unprepared for his own destiny.
Absolutely. Nicholas II, the last emperor of Russia, head of the Romanov Dynasty.
Mm.
A brutal end for him and his entire family. And there's this fascinating, often overlooked connection between his early life and figures like King Rama V of Thailand.
Right.
The contemporary.
Right, and that's our mission for this deep dive. We've got a stack of sources, personal notes, diplomatic cables, detailed histories, you name it. We want to pull out the most important nuggets for you. Sort of a shortcut to getting really well informed on this captivating and ultimately very bloody chapter of history. So let's just jump in.
Okay, Nicholas II's early life, it's a study in contrast, isn't it? Born a Tsarevich, crown prince, but his personality, just so different from his father, Tsar Alexander III. Worlds apart. Alexander III was this, formidable figure, physically imposing, about 190 centimeters tall, a real strongman ruler. Nicholas, though, was known to be, much softer, conciliatory, soft-spoken, maybe a bit naive, and shorter, too, around 170 centimeters, which was considered short then for a Russian man.
Yeah.
And that title Tsar comes from Caesar, right? Russia seeing itself as the heir to Rome. But despite being the heir, Nicholas wasn't really formally trained for the role. His father was robust, didn't expect to die young, so the preparation just wasn't prioritized, it seems.
And here's a great little detail from his youth. Part of the reason for that big Eastern tour he took as Tsarevich, his father actually sent him partly to distract him from a young woman he was completely infatuated with.
Ah, yes. A very royal way to handle teenage romance, isn't it? Send him halfway across the world. But it wasn't just that, of course. There were serious diplomatic missions, too. Remoting the Trans-Siberian Railway in Vladivostok, for instance.
Okay, so let's talk about that trip. The original plan was quite extensive.
It was. Egypt, India, Sri Lanka, Singapore, Saigon. But Siam, modern Thailand, wasn't initially on the list. You have to remember, Russia had pretty close ties with Britain and France, and Siam was seen as this delicate buffer state between their colonial ambitions. Very tricky situation.
So how did Siam get added? Because it clearly did, and it became quite significant.
It's a brilliant piece of diplomacy, really. Apparently, British and French advisors were trying to keep him away, spreading rumors of a plague in Siam, things like that. They were worried about Russian influence messing with the balance of power there.
Right.
But King Rama V, he made a bold move. He sent his half-brother, Prince Damrong Rajanapab, all the way down to Singapore to personally invite Nicholas, and Nicholas accepted.
Wow.
He ended up staying for 5 days in March 1891. And he was apparently hugely impressed. Hosted at Saranram Palace, this magnificent river procession, that visit actually became the benchmark for grand royal receptions in Siam after that.
And the visit itself, it wasn't just ceremonial, was it? It had real diplomatic weight.
Oh, absolutely. It cemented crucial ties. King Rama V and Nicholas exchanged their highest royal decorations. And the next year, Rama V sent Prince Damrong back to Russia to give Siam's highest order to Nicholas's father, Tsar Alexander III.
And we have those famous photos of them together.
Yes. One in Siam, when Nicholas was still Tsarevich, and another later in St. Petersburg after he became Tsar. It's also interesting, Nicholas spoke English, French, and Russian. French was very much the court language across Europe then.
Okay, but after Siam, things took a dramatic turn in Japan. The Otsu incident.
Yes, quite dramatic.
Yeah.
After Siam, he went to Japan. And in the city of Otsu, a samurai, one of his police escorts actually, attacked him with a sword, cut his forehead, drew blood. He was saved by Prince George of Greece, who was traveling with him and managed to parry a second blow.
Why? What prompted the attack?
Well, the exact reasons are still debated. Some accounts say Nicholas, perhaps unintentionally, disrespected local customs or a shrine. Others whispered he'd stared inappropriately at the attacker's wife. We don't know for sure, but the result was immediate. Alexander III recalled him straight away. Too dangerous.
And that incident had long-lasting consequences, didn't it? Beyond just the scar.
It really did. It seems to have fueled a lifelong contempt Nicholas had for the Japanese. He apparently referred to them as monkeys in his private diaries. And you have to wonder how much that personal animosity, born from that single violent moment, influenced his decisions later, especially during the Russo-Japanese War.
A frightening thought, how personal bias can shape history.
Definitely. It shows how a leader's personal feelings, if unchecked, can really impact foreign policy, sometimes disastrously.
So he returns from this eventful trip, and then, not too long after, everything changes. His father's death.
Yes, completely unexpected. In 1894, Alexander III, who seemed so strong, died very suddenly, rapidly. It seemed like the flu, but it took him quickly. And suddenly, Nicholas, just 26 years old, is thrust onto the throne. He famously felt utterly unprepared, overwhelmed. I mean, governing a country that covers 1/6 of the world's landmass. It's daunting for anyone, let alone someone who felt unready.
And one of his father's last acts concerned Nicholas's personal life.
Right. On his deathbed, Alexander III finally gave his blessing for Nicholas to marry Princess Alex of Hesse-Darmstadt. She was the German princess he had loved for years, but his father had forbidden the match, partly because she was Protestant, so Alex had to convert to Russian Orthodoxy. She became Tsarina Alexandra.
And her first public appearance. Not exactly auspicious.
No, quite the opposite. Her first major appearance in Russia was walking in the funeral procession for her father-in-law, Alexander III. Many people saw that as a terrible omen, a nude Tsarina arriving, as it were, behind a coffin.
And then, just 2 years into his reign, the coronation in 1896 is marred by absolute tragedy, the Kudynka tragedy.
Horrific. A massive crowd gathered on Kudynka Field in Moscow for coronation festivities. There were supposed to be free gifts, mugs, food, beer. A rumor apparently spread that there wouldn't be enough for everyone, and a stampede started. Over 1,300 people were trampled and crushed to death.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And despite that horror, Nicholas attended a ball that same evening.
He did. A lavish ball at the French embassy. Reports say his uncles and advisors persuaded him it was diplomatically necessary, that snubbing the French would be worse. But the public perception, it was catastrophic. He seemed utterly heartless, callous. That event, right at the start, cemented a deep-seated resentment, even hatred, among many Russians towards him.
So a tragic start, and then comes the Russo-Japanese War a few years later. How did that disaster unfold?
Well, it's complex, but essentially Russia was expanding its influence in the East, partly encouraged by Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, who maybe wanted Russia looking away from Europe. This brought them into conflict with Japan over territory in China, particularly Manchuria and Korea. Japan felt its interests were being ignored, disrespected.
And Nicholas's personal feelings about Japan likely didn't help diplomatic efforts.
Probably not. Remember the Yotsu incident? So Japan launches a surprise attack on the Russian naval base at Port Arthur in 1904, without declaring war. Russia suffered huge losses, over 200,000 casualties compared to maybe 50,000 for Japan. It was a shock. And the final humiliation was the Baltic Fleet. It sailed literally halfway around the world.
All the way around Africa?
Yes, only to be completely annihilated by the Japanese fleet in the Tsushima Strait in 1905. Utterly destroyed. That war was incredibly costly, drained the treasury, led to higher taxes, and just fueled more public anger and discontent. It really weakened the regime.
So amidst all this external turmoil, the war, the public anger, there's this intense internal drama playing out in the palace, the succession.
The pressure for a male heir was immense. Nicholas and Alexandra had 4 daughters. Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia. Wonderful girls, by all accounts. But under Russian law at the time, only a male could inherit the throne. No son meant a huge succession crisis for the Romanov Dynasty. The stability felt threatened.
And then finally, their 5th child.
Yes, finally, a boy, Alexei, born in 1904. There was immense joy, of course, the Tsarevich, the heir. But almost immediately, they discovered a terrible secret. He had hemophilia.
The bleeding disease.
Right, a genetic disorder passed down through his mother, Alexandra, ultimately tracing back to Queen Victoria. Any small bump or cut could lead to severe, prolonged, life-threatening bleeding. And this illness was kept an incredibly closely guarded secret, even from many close relatives.
Why the secrecy?
Because of the implications for the throne. An heir apparent with a potentially fatal condition. It would have caused massive instability, political maneuvering. It also meant Alexandra became even more focused inward, almost consumed by worry for her son, withdrawing further from public life and court society.
And this desperate situation, this secret illness, opens the door for one of history's most notorious figures, Grigory Rasputin.
Precisely. Alexandra was desperate. Doctors could do little for Alexei's bleeding episodes. Then they hear about this Siberian peasant, a mystic, a self-proclaimed holy man Rasputin. And somehow, Rasputin seemed to have this uncanny ability to calm Alexei, and more importantly, to apparently stop the bleeding episodes when doctors failed.
How? Was it hypnosis? Some kind of folk medicine?
Nobody knows for sure. Maybe it was a calming presence. Maybe he advised against using aspirin, which we now know thins the blood. Or maybe it was just coincidence. But to Alexandra, it seemed like a miracle. She became convinced he was sent by God, the only one who could save her precious son. This gave him enormous, almost unchecked influence over her.
And that led to all sorts of rumors, didn't it, about their relationship?
Oh, absolutely. Persistent rumors of an affair, of him controlling her, compounded by Rasputin's own scandalous reputation. He was known for his debauchery, heavy drinking, womanizing. He had this strange belief that one needed to sin to truly understand repentance. It shocked the aristocracy.
But his influence went way beyond the Tsarina's private life, didn't it? He started meddling in politics.
Deeply. Through Alexander's absolute faith in him, Rasputin started advising on government appointments. Ministers were hired and fired based on his whims, or so it seemed. Reports say over 10 ministers were changed in a very short period, often because they criticized Rasputin or tried to lessen his influence. He'd just tell Alexander they had to go. This created chaos in the government and absolutely infuriated the traditional Russian nobility and members of the court. They saw this peasant mystic destroying the empire from within.
And all this is happening as the world is sliding towards World War I.
Yes, and when war breaks out in 1914, Nicholas initially sends a relative, Grand Duke Nicholas Mikhailovich, to command the armies. He was actually quite popular. But in 1915, Nicholas is persuaded, some say by Alexandra, influenced by Rasputin, to take personal command of the army at the front lines.
Despite having basically no military experience.
Exactly. Many warned him against it. It meant any military failure, any defeat, would be directly blamed on him, the Tsar. A huge political risk. And it also meant leaving the capital.
Which left Alexandra effectively in charge back in St. Petersburg, right?
Yeah.
With Rasputin whispering in her ear.
Precisely. Which further fueled the resentment, the conspiracies, the sense that the country was being run by a German Tsarina and a mad monk while Russian soldiers were dying at the front.
It's interesting, too, Rasputin himself had apparently warned Nicholas against entering the war.
He did. Quite accurately, he predicted it would lead to disaster for Russia and the dynasty, but his advice on that point was ignored.
So Nicholas is at the front. Alexandra and Rasputin are seen as running things back home, and the frustration among the elite just boils over.
It reaches a breaking point. In December 1916, a group of high-ranking nobles, led by Prince Felix Yusupov, who was married to the Tsar's niece and part of one of Russia's wealthiest families, decided to take matters into their own hands. They lured Rasputin to Yusupov's palace and then tried to kill him.
And the story of his death is just legendary, isn't it? Almost unbelievable.
It really is. According to Yusupov's account, they first tried poisoning him with cyanide baked into cakes and laced in wine. It seemed to have no effect. Then Yusupov shot him. Rasputin fell, but later apparently revived and tried to escape. They shot him again multiple times. Finally, they bound him, beat him, and threw him into the freezing Moika River through a hole in the ice. The autopsy later apparently found water in his lungs, suggesting he was still alive when thrown in. Cause of death was ultimately drowning or hypothermia.
Just incredible. And Rasputin left behind a prophecy, didn't he?
Yeah, about his own death.
Yes, a very chilling one. He reportedly wrote to Nicholas earlier, predicting that if he were killed by peasants or commoners, the Tsar and his children would survive and rule. But he warned, if he was killed by nobles, by royals, or their relatives, then the Tsar and his entire family would be killed within 2 years, and the nobility would perish too.
Then he was killed by nobles.
He was, adding this layer of almost supernatural dread to the final years of the Romanovs. So Rasputin is dead, but did his removal solve anything? Or did things just continue to unravel?
If anything, things accelerated. His death didn't calm the situation. The underlying problems, the war, the food shortages, the government chaos, the loss of faith in the Tsar were still there. Within a few months of Rasputin's murder, the February Revolution of 1917 erupted in Petrograd, St. Petersburg, triggered by bread riots, strikes, and troop mutinies.
And Nicholas wasn't even in the capital when it happened.
No, he was at military headquarters. He tried to get back, but his train was stopped. Communications broke down. His generals and politicians in the Duma basically told him it was over. He was forced to abdicate there on his imperial train on March 15, 1917, first for himself, and then, realizing Alexei's hemophilia made him unfit to rule in such chaos, he abdicated on his son's behalf, too.
A truly stunning fall from power. Who did he name as successor then?
He named his younger brother Grand Duke Michael Alexandrovich. But Michael was shrewder, perhaps, about the public mood. He saw the chaos, the anger. He refused to accept the throne unless it was offered to him by a future constituent assembly chosen by the people. And since that assembly never effectively convened with that power, his refusal essentially marked the end. 300 years of Romanov rule, gone. just like that.
What happened to the family immediately after the abdication?
Initially, they were held under house arrest by the provisional government, the shaky government that took over after the Tsar at the Alexander Palace outside Petrograd. But then came the Second Revolution, the October Revolution in 1917, when Lenin and the Bolsheviks seized power.
And things got much worse for the Romanovs then.
Much worse and much more precarious. The Bolsheviks saw them as dangerous symbols of the old regime. They moved the family further and further away from the capital, partly for security, partly to prevent any rescue attempts by the anti-Bolshevik forces, the White Army, during the unfolding civil war. They were sent first to Tobolsk in Siberia and then finally to the city of Yekaterinburg, right on the edge of the Ural Mountains, basically the border between Europe and Asia. They were imprisoned there in a place ominously called the Ipatiev House, the House of Special Purpose.
And it was there, in Yekaterinburg, that the final tragic act took place.
Yes. On the night of July 16th, going into the 17th, 1918, the family Nicholas, Alexandra, the 4 daughters Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, young Alexei, plus 4 loyal attendants who had stayed with them, their doctor, cook, valet, and Alexandra's maid. They were all woken up in the middle of the night, told there was unrest in the town and they needed to move to the basement for safety. Possibly told they were going to take a photo to quell rumors they'd escaped.
Just a pretext.
A brutal pretext. They were gathered in a small, empty basement room. Then, a squad of executioners, members of the Cheka, the Bolshevik secret police, filed in. The local commander, Yakov Yurovsky, read out an order. The Ural Regional Soviet had condemned them to death. Chaos erupted. Nicholas was apparently shot first, killed quickly. Alexandra, too. But the daughters. It was horrific. They had sewn jewels, diamonds, pearls into their corsets, hoping maybe to bribe guards or fund an escape later. This makeshift armor actually deflected some of the bullets initially. The room filled with smoke, dust, screams. The executioners had to use bayonets and more close-range shots to finish the job. Alexei was also still alive after the initial volley and was shot multiple times. Sources say over 100 bullets were fired in that small, cramped room. A scene of utter butchery.
And the aftermath was just as brutal, wasn't it? The disposal of the bodies.
Equally brutal and driven by fear. The Bolsheviks were terrified. The whites might find the bodies and turn them into relics or rallying symbols. So they took the bodies out to a remote mine shaft, stripped them, trying to destroy them with sulfuric acid and fire, and then buried them in secret, unmarked graves. Mutilated them to prevent identification. This secrecy was paramount, and it directly led to decades of mystery.
The Soviet government just clamped down on the whole story.
Completely. They officially announced Nicholas's execution, but were ambiguous about the rest of the family for a long time. The grave locations were a top state secret. Even most Soviet citizens didn't know the full details or where they were buried.
And that secrecy, that lack of definitive proof, that's what allowed the Anastasia myth to take hold, right? The idea that one daughter somehow survived.
Absolutely. Because there were no bodies, no concrete evidence for decades, it left room for doubt, for hope, for imposters. Numerous women came forward over the years claiming to be Grand Duchess Anastasia, the most famous being Anna Anderson. It became one of the great historical mysteries of the 20th century.
But eventually, the truth started to emerge.
Slowly, painstakingly. In 1979, an amateur historian and geologist, using Yurovsky's secret notes, actually located the first gravesite near Yekaterinburg. It contained remains believed to be Nicholas, Alexandra, 3 daughters, and the 4 servants. But this discovery was kept secret until after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991.
And even then, 2 bodies were still missing. Alexei and 1 daughter.
Correct. Which kept the Anastasia question, or perhaps the Maria question, alive for a while longer. It wasn't until 2007 that a second, separate, shallower grave was found nearby, about 60 meters away. It contained the fragmented and burned remains of 2 younger bodies.
So how did they finally confirm, beyond any doubt, that these were Alexei and the missing daughter and that no one survived? This is where science comes in, right?
Exactly. DNA technology was the key. They could compare DNA from the remains to living relatives of the Romanovs, like Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who is related through Alexander's side. But the real clincher, the breakthrough for confirming Alexei especially, was incredible. Scientists managed to extract DNA from a blood-stained shirt, the very shirt Nicholas II wore during the Otsu incident in Japan back in 1891. It had been preserved as a relic in the Winter Palace.
Wow, that's amazing. A piece of history from his youth, providing the final proof decades after his death.
Isn't it? That DNA comparison provided the definitive link. It confirmed the remains in the second grave were indeed Tsarevich Alexei, and based on the DNA, Grand Duchess Maria, not Anastasia. The science closed the case. No one survived the basement execution. The mystery was finally conclusively solved.
And what happened to the remains then?
After extensive identification processes, all the Romanov family members found in both graves, along with their loyal servants, were eventually reburied together. They were interred in the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg in 1998, the traditional resting place of the Russian Tsars. Alexei and Maria's remains joined them later, after their discovery and identification around 2007-2008, though there were some delays due to church requests for more verification, which are still ongoing for the final interment. The Russian Orthodox Church also canonized the family as passion bearers, essentially martyrs who faced death in a Christ-like manner.
What an incredible century-long journey from execution to final resting place and confirmed identification.
It truly is. History, politics, secrecy, myth, and ultimately science all playing a part.
Okay, so let's try to unpack all of this. The story of Nicholas II and the Romanovs. It really feels like a stark reminder, doesn't it? How personal character, these huge global events like war, public feeling, how it all just tragically intertwined. Absolutely. It led to the complete collapse of an empire. And if you look at the bigger picture, it really highlights how revolutions often happen when people feel cornered, like they have no other choice. When there's this perceived indifference from the top to just fundamental suffering, starvation, war losses, lack of representation, it reaches a boiling point.
Yeah.
And it makes you ask, how much of Nicholas's fate was just terrible timing, being czar during such incredibly turbulent times, World War I, the rise of communism, and how much was down to his own personality, his indecisiveness, his resistance to reform, maybe his inability to truly grasp the depth of the crisis until it was far too late. You mentioned his brother Michael earlier. Michael seemed to read the room much better when he refused the throne, didn't he?
He really did. A fleeting moment of political realism right at the end. So for your own provocative thought as you mull all this over, think about this. How did that deliberate secrecy, the suppression of information about the Romanovs' execution and burial by the Soviet state for decades, actually prolong their story? How did it allow myths like Anastasia's survival to capture the public imagination for so long? And how does that compare to other historical figures whose legacies remain debated or shrouded in mystery because the full facts were hidden, or maybe still are hidden, only for science, sometimes centuries later, to give us the final definitive answer? Something to think about.